Hello and welcome to another edition of Truth is Making a Comeback, a production of LibertyNation.com. I'm Lisa K. Donner. On today's episode, is the Democratic 2020 field for president putting you to sleep? We take a closer look at the ever-so-dull Dems, a nationwide scandal involving rich folks and Hollywood types getting their kids into elite American universities in a pay-for-play scheme. And the New Zealand gun grabbers go berzerk in the wake of the Mosque massacre. All this and more on Liberty Nation TV's news and analysis program.
Truth is making a comeback. America's top stories with Lisa K. Donner.
The Democrats are scrambling to find anyone who can take on Donald Trump in 2020. But thus far, the so-called progressives seem to be fielding a group of pretty dull folks to take on POTUS 45. This week, Liberty Nation's Joe Schaefer wrote, quote, "In 2015, Donald Trump was the party crasher at the boring pool party who sprang off the high dive and did a cannonball. The very rude splash in the face he gave conventional Republican establishment politics never really did dry, and Trump went on to capture the GOP nomination and then the White House. The Democratic field for 2020 is now taking shape, hoping to find the right challenger to topple Trump and retake the presidency. But where is its party crasher? The person to rattle the uniform strident progressive consensus in Democrat ranks and nurture a true political phenomenon similar to the Trump tsunami of 2016. Joining me now is LN's national correspondent for a brief discussion of the Democratic field, which seems to be getting bigger every day. But is it getting any better? That is the question. Welcome to Truth is Making a Comeback, Joe.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to be here.
All right, let's start with the Lady Dems, shall we? How about Pocahontas, also known as Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts? What's her boring quotient?
Well, she's not getting any traction at all, so I would say her boring quotient is pretty high or low, however you measure that. When your own home state, the leading liberal newspaper in your home state, says that you missed your chance and 2016 was a better shot for you, and you're not really doing anything in 2020, then you know you're in trouble. So she has to find a way to get a spark in her campaign, and I don't really see it happening for her. There's been too many missteps, the DNA test, and she's just not saying anything that's lighting a fire, which is the problem with most of these Democrats, to be honest with you.
Next up, we have New York's Kirsten Gillibrand. What do you think of her?
Yes, she's trying to please everybody. She knows it's a progressive party now. She's I don't know if flip-flops too strong word, but she changes her tune to go with the progressive wins. She's gone hard left on immigration, gun control, same-sex marriage, just reversing previous positions. And, you know, it's a calculated move on her part to be the most liberal of all the progressives, but it's not really a way to become a breakout star, showing you don't really have any deeply felt principles. So again, I don't see how she's going to light a fire under anybody by doing that.
Now, what about Amy Klobuchar? Though I have to say that she will go down in history as giving her, throwing her hat in the ring in a driving snowstorm while talking about climate change. Anyway, what do you think of her lack of name recognition? Is that going to be a problem?
Well, that was certainly memorable. That's one way to get noticed. I don't think her problem is unique to her. It's a problem unique to a lot of these candidates who don't have name recognition. Is how do you boost that? How do you boost your profile when you're in a field where everybody's going to be saying basically the same things? Democratic orthodoxy is so rigid now, you can't stray too far off the reservation. Apologies to Elizabeth Warren there. You can't stray too far away from the norm. And then how do you distinguish yourself if you're saying what everybody else is saying? So that's sort of the trap that the Amy Klobuchar, even someone like Cory Booker has. You want to you want to be unique. You want to make a name for yourself, but you can't say anything that the orthodox Democrat ideology will be offended by.
Well, you just made a good point. Do you think that also goes for Kamala Harris?
It does. She's got an interesting take. Again, she's going to have to find a way to distinguish herself, and she can't do it that way by differentiating herself. So she's going with the "I'm the tough prosecutor" line, sort of a Democratic version of Chris Christie. And what I didn't think it served her well at all in the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court nomination hearings. She came across as mean. She came across as just like vindictive, not tough. And then she didn't really make any great points. So I think an honest Democrat would say she didn't really serve herself well there. And I think she's going to end up coming across as very strident, like Chris Christie did, if you recall, in 2016. He wanted to be the tough guy, and he ended up talking about shooting Russian planes down in a no-fly zone and potentially starting World War III. My feeling with Kamala Harris is she's going to be like that, the Democratic version of that, where she's just going to be strident and tough, and I don't think it's going to go over very well.
Well, and Harris does seem to have that same issue that Hillary had, which is, well, basically the likability problem.
That's it. You're right.
All right, so now let's move on to what I call the 4 Bs: Bernie, Beto, Booker, and Biden. Do you really think that Beto is boring?
I think he's an empty shell. The problem with him is he comes across great when you put him on the cover of Vanity Fair and say he's the next JFK. When you ask him serious policy questions, he has a hard time articulating a clear vision. So I think he comes across as muddled, almost even confused, and he hasn't really presented a coherent vision, and I'm not sure he can. So the more he talks, I think the more it's actually a liability. But of course, he looks great, and that does go a far way in politics, unfortunately.
Well, do you think it's possible he's going to have a Roger Mudd, Ted Kennedy moment?
When they ask him, why are you running for president, he just can't answer it. Well, he sort of already had that moment when he said, I was born to do this. I was surprised that he thought that was a good thing to say. People don't want career politicians. People don't want people who think they're entitled to be president. And he says, this is what I was born to do. I think that's very off-putting. I don't know how Democratic voters feel about it, but that is not something that I would encourage him to say moving forward.
Okay, now, do you think the populace is going to feel the burn this time around, Joe?
I think Bernie's going to have a much tougher time this time around, and it's because he does not have Hillary Clinton as a foil. Hillary Clinton was the best thing he had going for him in 2016. He could just stand there and not be Hillary Clinton, and that helped him when he talked about the things that he did care about, like workers' rights and unions and all that stuff. He was just a natural antidote within the Democratic ranks to Hillary Clinton. He doesn't have that this time around. There is no Hillary Clinton in the field. There is no establishment titan for him to lean against. So, and he's already, I think, nervous about this. He's been talking much more about identity politics, which I don't think is his strong suit. He should be talking about the economy and caring about workers from a Democratic perspective, which I don't necessarily agree with, but his talking points are valuable. And if he's going to drift off into saying the same things about victimization and oppression and racial minorities, it's not going to serve him well. But again, not having Hillary, I think it's going to really hurt him.
What about Spartacus?
Spartacus, I don't think he belongs in this killer bees conversation because he's just too much. He's a lightweight. You know, Biden, Bernie, they have certain. Well, I guess Beto's a lightweight too. But Booker, he hasn't really accomplished anything in the Senate. I don't know what his clear vision is. He wants to be the first vegan president. How many voters care about that? I don't care what he eats for dinner. What do you stand for? What do you represent? And he's sort of in the Klobuchar camp where he's not going to be allowed to say anything that veers too far from this Democratic orthodoxy. So therefore, how does he make an argument that you should pick me and not these other dwarves? I'm different when he's not going to be different at all. It's going to really hurt him.
Last but not least, we have Uncle Joe, who hasn't officially entered the race, but everyone reading the political tea leaves say that Joe Biden is in. What say you?
Oh, I think he's definitely going to run. He wants to run. He's always wanted to be president. He ran twice before. I don't agree with people who think he's a formidable candidate, that he would be the best to go up against Trump. He's a two-time loser. The only reason he became vice president is because you had a young, black, sort of progressive candidate, and they wanted a safe establishment, sort of white, kind of like what Mike Pence is for Donald Trump. To smooth over the edges. And he did that. He served that role well. But you don't want that for a president. I don't think anyone's clamoring for Mike Pence to run for president in 2024. So I don't see that there's this wave of enthusiasm among Democrats saying, oh, we got to get Joe Biden to run. I don't see him as this powerful candidate. His age and the fact that he's an establishment Dem is going to really hurt him with the younger voters. They're thirsting they really want generational change. And I don't think they want a president in his 70s, going to be in his 80s if he stays in there 2 terms. And I think that's going to hurt him a lot more than people are saying.
Well, and I think there's a very good chance that Joe Biden could have a Michael Dukakis moment as well. Don't you think he's ripe for that?
He has about 1,000 of them, doesn't he? he says so many things that are kind of off the cuff, and he survives them. I just think he's not going to catch fire. I think that's the problem with a lot of these Dems. You're going to see it in the debates. There's not going to be this galvanizing moment. Trump was such a galvanizing moment, but he was a galvanizing moment for himself. He didn't help the other candidates. But there's not going to be a galvanizing moment in these Democratic debates. And I think as soon as August, the Democrats are going to realize we don't really have anybody who's exciting at all. Any of the names we've already discussed, none of them are really going to be exciting to take on Donald Trump in 2020.
Thanks for the political assessments and analysis and insight. That's Joe Schaefer of LibertyNation.com. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Lisa.
William Singer is the huckster behind a nationwide university admissions scandal that ran a pay-your-way-into-college scam. The New York Times calls Singer the Pied Piper of college admissions, who, quote, became the mastermind of an enormous, elaborate scheme carried out over years, brazenly paying off coaches and test monitors, faking exam scores, and fabricating student biographies. Prosecutors say all to help wealthy parents cheat their children's way into desirable colleges, unquote. Armed with a fancy website and sporting an upscale look and a PowerPoint, Singer's Dog and Pony Show took buckets of money from parents who wanted the prestige of having their son or daughter attend an elite American university, but without the academics or athletics to merit such placement. Joining me now from the swamp is Liberty Nation's Tim Donner to discuss the depth and breadth of this scam. Welcome to Truth TV, Tim.
Thank you, Lise. Good to be here.
Okay, can you start out with giving us some basic facts here? For instance, how big of a scandal is this, and how much did some parents actually fork over to get their kid into Yale or USC?
Well, it's a pretty wide-ranging scandal. So far, 50 people have been charged with paying Mr. Singer enormous sums of money to basically do whatever it takes to get their kids into their preferred universities. They faked tests, they faked athletic credentials. Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin have gotten the most publicity because they're TV actresses, but there have also been corporate executives and hedge fund managers, a university professor, chairman of a law firm, who've all been snagged in this scandal. One parent, Felicity Huffman, who many people know, forked over $500,000 or more, and many others paid tens of thousands of dollars in a scandal that is both shocking and yet unsurprising when we consider what wealthy parents, what wealthy elitists will do and have done over time to get their kids into the preferred universities.
So there's been quite a bit of talk that the kids who won their admission to these universities are actually in the dark this whole time, that they're complete innocents. Is this really plausible?
Yeah, that's a ridiculous claim. A ridiculous claim because the evidence suggests very much otherwise. I mean, these kids were told to appear not as smart as they were so they could fake a disability and they'd get more time to take the test. They knew that proctors were taking the test for them. They sometimes participated in photos with their so-called teams, athletic teams, knowing full well that they'd never been in a boat, perhaps, and certainly never a road crew. So in at least many of these cases, if not all of them, the kids were every bit as complicit as the parents.
Now, let's take a minute and look at the universities. Are their admissions people culpable in this mess? Do you think any of them will ultimately do jail time?
Well, I think it's still pretty much unclear from the standpoint of the university. I mean, there's nothing yet to suggest they had any reason to go along with this. Unlike, for example, when they get a large contribution, let's say Felicity Huffman just donated $1 million to the university, then the admissions office will know that that's a prompt for them to admit Felicity Huffman's child. But I don't see a whole lot of advantage for these universities to admitting students that, you know, they're not, I mean, the universities are not making any money off of this. It was Mr. Singer who was making the money, and the parents who were paying the money, and the kids who were going along with it to get to their preferred university. So there's nothing, at least yet, to suggest that the universities are culpable in this.
Well, let me just think out loud for a minute here. I mean, if you're going to say some kid is going to make it on the Yale lacrosse team or the Yale crew team, and you take pictures with them, and then they come to the school, let's face it, the coach has to understand these people aren't for real, so they have to be playing along with it.
Well, the coaches, certainly there's got to be some culpability there because they knew perfectly well that these students who were admitted via Mr. Singer's efforts, which will probably land him a hefty amount of time in jail, that they were being sold a bill of goods, that these kids didn't know anything about crew or lacrosse, depending on the situation, but they went along with it. So I think there's some coaches who are likely to get snagged in this scandal.
Yeah, and something tells me that they didn't go along with it for nothing, but we shall find that out eventually. One final question, Tim. I spoke with one parent this week whose 2 children worked their butts off to get into 2 Ivy Leagues. She was incensed. Is there a chance that some of these pay-for-play kids might be booted from these schools?
Well, the University of Southern California, USC, has already said that they will examine these cases on a case-by-case basis, depending on the individual. There's been talk about putting asterisks on their academic records, also to just immediately dismiss the students since they were admitted under false pretenses. So there's going to be action taken by the universities on this. Whether that will implicate themselves in this at all, we've already talked about the coaches, whether it'll implicate the colleges or universities beyond just the parents and the kids, to whom I don't know what will be done. We don't really know yet, but there's many possible remedies for this, and I believe that a lot of them will be pursued by the universities who were played in this scandal.
Thanks very much for joining us, Tim.
Thank you, Lisa.
That's Tim Donner from LibertyNation.com. And now for this week's parting shot. Getting your hands on a firearm in New Zealand is no easy task. Everyone knows this, and yet here we are again having the same old knee-jerk discussion about more gun control following a shooting at 2 mosques in Christchurch. Like all acts of terror, 'tis a sad tale indeed. At such times, it is a politician's want to rush in and fix things. Customarily, their efforts result in basically making the situation a whole lot worse. Such appears to be the case as the Prime Minister of New Zealand prepares to, quote, reform the country's gun laws in the wake of this tragedy. But here's the rub. New Zealand already has quite a strict gun control policy as things currently stand. Owning a firearm in the land of the Kiwi is not a right, but rather a privilege bestowed upon those who are willing to run the gauntlet of the country's gun laws. And there are many. Everyone must be licensed, all gun transfers and sales must include a background check, everyone must take a safety class. It is a long and arduous process to legally own a firearm in New Zealand. If you can think up a gun control law, New Zealand likely already has it on the books. Guess what all these firearms restrictions did to stop Friday's tragedy? How about nothing? If you look at the facts of the case, and they are difficult to ascertain amid all the vitriol, one could even make the case that New Zealand's totalitarian gun laws made the situation worse. How so? If you dig into what really happened, you will notice that a heroic bystander wrestled the weapon from the shooter and managed to fire 2 rounds as the attacker attempted to flee the scene. Ah, yes, the old good guy with the gun scenario that gun control advocates love to ignore time and again. So one must ask, what if there are more armed people in and around those mosques? What if they fired upon the perpetrators? Could they have been stopped before so many lives were lost? The logical answer to all these questions is yes. Last year, the worst car crash in 13 years occurred in New Zealand. The next morning, the airwaves were not filled with people calling for a ban on vehicles. Why? Because a vehicle isn't a weapon unless someone uses it in that manner. Such is the case with a firearm. But don't tell the politicians that. They will have no reason to grandstand. As it is, the mosque killings have provided the ammunition for the anti-gun political class to run amok. Step aside because the anti-firearm show is about to begin, even though the left already loves to point out that, quote, New Zealand generally has very low levels of gun violence, likely due in part to its restrictions on firearms, unquote. Perhaps it's actually because of a projected population density of only 18.4 people per kilometer by the year 2020. Fact is, there are about 7 times more sheep than people in New Zealand. Might that have something to do with the low homicide rate? There is one bit of good news for those who believe in the right to bear arms. Approximately 1.2 million people in New Zealand own a gun. That's about 1 firearm for every 4 people. Let's hope these gun owners will not be led to the slaughter like their 4-hoofed friends and resist all efforts of the do-gooder class to take away their firearms, because the gun grabbers aren't likely to quit until no one owns a gun save the government officials. And that, my friends, always signals tyranny and oppression dead ahead. And that's my parting shot. And that's it for this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and hit our website, libertynation.com, where facts matter. Have a great week.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at libertynation.com.